Well, I've heard that John Gwynne tends to go armed and armored into interviews, so I figured to get some Viking credibility, I'd better arm myself as well. And I brought my original blood axe. Anyway, let's get this started, right? Cheers. Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about books, and not just any books, but one book in particular. And today we'll be talking about The Fury of the Gods, the third and final book in the Bloodsworn trilogy by John Gwynne. I finished it today. I am not happy with it, which will probably not come as much of a surprise to any of you who have watched my videos on both the Shadow and the Hunger of the Gods. So, buckle up. This will be interesting. We'll do the usual thing. That is, of course, I'll give you a quick synopsis what it is, what to expect, why to read it or why not to read it. I'll be as fair as possible in that one. And then I'll drink a little beer, and then we'll talk about details that will include a lot of spoilers. So if you are, allergic to spoilers, that's when you go and read the book. And if you are not allergic to spoilers, you can just continue watching. So that's what we're doing. And before we do all of that, I have to give, I'm very happy to give a personal shout out and cheers to my newest patron on Patreon, Momo. I'm really sorry this is not about a book I really enjoy, but thanks for becoming a patron. Cheers. Alright, The Fury of the Gods. What is it? What is it not? It is, as I said, the third book in the Bloodsworn trilogy by John Gwynne, and as such, it continues right after The Hunger of the Gods, and that is with, our main cast of characters that we have all met at this point. There's no additional new characters coming on in this one, and everyone comes together to have that final big battle where, the gods are back up there and doing god shit, and humans are drawn into that. Also, obviously, are different, tainted, which is a bad word, just to be clear, are also drawn into that. The Bloodsworn are coming back to Vigrid, and obviously the Battle Grim are doing their stuff, and, that's what you can expect. It is even more battle-focused and action-focused and action-heavy than the first two books, I would say. And it does try to resolve most of the personal feuds, personal plot lines, and so forth. It does all of that if you're into, that kind of stuff with your trilogy. You can say, I see I'm struggling here because, I don't want to spoil anything, and it's kind of difficult to do that with, the third book in a trilogy. So yeah, if you haven't read any of the Bloodsworn Saga yet, if you like Norse-themed fantasy that is very straightforward, has a lot of found family stuff in it, has a lot of fairly detailed battle scenes and combat scenes in there that are really well choreographed, because John Gwynne really knows his shit when it comes to Norse armor and stuff. What with him, having done Viking reenactment and everything, right? So if you're into that stuff, and that's all you want from a book, these are really interesting books. The world building of, basically Norse mythology after Ragnarok and the Battle of the Gods, and, having to figure out what to do with, the gods being dead and everything, as a general setup for the whole world, I think is really cool. The idea of using, Icelandic or Old Norse as a language for magic is really cool. A lot of these elements in here are really interesting if you're into Viking shit. If you are, also into, fairly straightforward plot lines that are all about revenge, getting people back, standing together, all of this stuff is in here. If you are, however, someone who wants to, be surprised by plot twists and stuff, you should probably stay away from these books, because every single plot development is absolutely telegraphed about 10 chapters in advance. So that's something that is in here that I feel comfortable warning you. If you want, a bit more variation beyond just a lot of battle and stuff, if you are, for example, into, human emotions and stuff, this may also not necessarily be the best thing for you. But if you are, like old school fantasy that is all about the battles, that is all about Viking shit, you can, read the whole Bloodsworn trilogy, and you'll probably enjoy yourselves. Just be aware there's a lot of stuff that I personally really don't like about it, but you can make your own choices. Now you can do that. If you've enjoyed the first 2 books, if you enjoyed both of those, yes, you can also enjoy The Fury of the Gods. If you were already sort of disappointed or let down by The Hunger of the Gods, I don't think anything in The Fury of the Gods will make you like this one more than the previous one. So, that's all I can tell you on why you should read this book. It's Viking shit all the time. Now that we have talked about all of that, I'll have a little beer, and you decide in your thought cage whether you want to stay for the spoiler-filled discussion or whether you want to go and read The Fury of the Gods first. You have been forewarned. All right, welcome back. I hope you have read the books or you don't care about spoilers, so let's talk about all the issues here. Now, just, from time to time wave this axe around because I just found it again and I have to, show it. Anyway, my point is, there's 3 or 4 main things I want to talk about with this book that I think cover... They're in the whole trilogy, but I don't want to repeat myself with the stuff that I said before, so this is hopefully new. Let's start with the first part. This series is, or this book in particular, is very serious, and that is not good. What do I mean with that? There's this idea that, grimdark, and I don't like the words, but a lot of this kind of fantasy is always using one specific tone, and this book is exactly that. Now, I don't want to get into the personal stuff with the personal tragedies of John Gwynne. I think it also applies to the first 2 books, so I don't think this is, a new development. But one of the reasons why I am not very happy with the Bloodsworn Saga and John Gwynne's writing, if all of it is like this, is... It's always, everyone is constantly stoically staring somewhere, is either rage-filled or just about to come down from a rage bout. Everyone is constantly angry, serious, and so forth. There is no humor. There are a few attempts at humor in there, here and there, but they never really work because the tone of the prose, the words don't change. It doesn't have any other option but being stoically, toxically masculine, staring and fighting. And yes, that is also coming through with the action, and we're coming back to that later, but the whole tone is there. There is nothing but that seriousness. There is no variation in the language in any way or form. And that is, I feel, sad. And that's certainly one of the things that I find annoying here. If I read other authors, not pointing any names here, not naming any names here, but there are usually shifts in tone from time to time, right? There is seriousness, there is humor, there is, tenderness sometimes when it comes to emotions and stuff, and this doesn't have that. It's constantly fighting, or we get told that people feel for each other. We never get shown because the language can't do that, or John Gwynne chose not to do that with his writing. The second part here is, of course, also emotions. I want to go down that route for a second here. There are emotions in these books, but most of the characters have very few emotions. They are all very manly emotions. I'm just continuing down that path. I don't want to accuse John Gwynne of anything here, but all the characters are they are about protecting other people. They are about fighting for each other. They are very much about revenge. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about women or men in these books. All characters are all about that. It's about staying with your friends and avenging them and all of that. But there is no romance in here. And don't get me wrong, I'm not much of a romance reader. There are a few situations where characters are, at least having sex, and John Gwynne is good enough to not give us really cringy sex scenes. I appreciate that, because that stuff's hard to write, but even the stuff that kind of leads to that is not described, because clearly characters having romantic feelings for other characters is something that we can't really talk about, because we have to be stoically masculine and out for revenge and stuff like that. And that's certainly something that I feel makes these books very successful with a specific kind of audience. Mostly, I suspect, a male audience. I can certainly see myself having enjoyed those books much more a couple of years back than I'm currently enjoying them. But I think it's important to point that out. These books are written by someone who is thoroughly rooted in patriarchy and grown up in that the same way I was, and everyone is, but someone who is comfortable with just using these things that we got taught, using those emotions that are acceptable for dudes for all the characters. And that leaves a lot of stuff unexplored, and the situations where suddenly people are, having sex, and it sometimes comes out of nowhere, and we're like, so, clearly we couldn't talk about them having emotions before, so they just decide to go into the bushes and fuck. And sure, I can see how that can happen in, military situations where people are, when you're going down that route of people basically needing to relieve all kinds of tensions in that kind of stuff, in that kind of situation after a battle or before a battle. Other authors have done that before, but there has to be some explanation. It has to be put in there somewhere. But since these characters don't have that emotional range, or John Gwynne chose to not explore that emotional side of any of these characters, it feels kind of flat. It kind of falls flat. So that's the first big issue that I think covers the entire trilogy. Maybe his other books are better in that regard, and it's just that he decided to go all grim and Norse on this. I don't know. But it's certainly a big problem. Now let's look at the next problem here, and that is slavery and racism, because of course it is. I'm gonna, have to talk about that for a second. We talk about the tainted situation, and then I'll explain why I think it falls flat in a lot of ways, even though I think John Gwynne is trying something really good and important here. And then we'll talk about why the choice of words is really unfortunate in this book. So, obviously, we have all these people that have the blood of one or the other gods, and all these gods being animals, they have special powers, and they are, by tradition, enslaved. They are thralls, which, yeah, I get it, and we know from Norse history that having thralls is totally something that was a part of Norse culture for a long time. So I see why John Gwynne went there. Obviously, the main large conflict is about Lycorefa the dragon deciding to supposedly fight for the thralls, for the so-called tainted, for the different monsters, the Vaesen and so forth, to have freedom and no longer be, enthralled immediately, which is really good. And obviously the world ends with Elva giving, all her thralls their freedom and deciding that, yes, all the people with the blood of gods in them are also just human like everyone else. Powerful metaphor on, slavery, I guess, and racism. Could be. The problem is, it doesn't really work out that well. And that's, I think, yes, fantasy can and should talk about these kind of topics, and fantasy can be one way of exploring them without drawing in too much, contemporary politics and so forth into the discussion, which I think it can be really helpful. Now, here's why it fails in this specific book. The first part, I think, is that, we need to figure out that the good guys finally decide out of their own free will to give, all those thralls their freedom. That's something that has to happen. But first, obviously, the poor enslaved have to be, taken advantage of by the bad guys who pretend to actually champion civil rights, so to speak, right? And that's an unfortunate framing of a lot of civil rights discourse in a lot of ways. To begin with. It obviously also falls flat because, once again, emotions and stuff are not John Gwynne's strong suit. So when Elva decides to give everyone their freedom, it's supposedly about her friend Grend, who is obviously also has, the blood of the dog god, or the hound in him. It's supposedly just because she likes that one guy, she decides that maybe racism is bad. And yeah, that's not how actually, how we solve civil rights problems, by realizing that one of our friends is actually, okay, even though they have a different skin color or other, ethnic background or whatever. That's not how that works. It takes away the entire sort of political discussion of everyone being free and everyone being equal and so forth. It takes all of that away because there is no full understanding there. Maybe it is supposed to be in there, but since we don't get that much of Elva's inner life either. She doesn't mull over that much. Goes well, actually, I think they're all really the same as us. So why are we doing this? Instead, is they are powerful, so we need to hold them down in case they decide to just use their powers against us. she doesn't change her mind in that regard. Instead, she forces the wolf god to swear a blood oath to not use, which is arguably just the same thing as thrall collar, I guess, in that regard. So the underlying idea that people that are different are a danger and are a threat, that is never taken away. Instead, it's just because she likes her friend, she decides to do this grand gesture so we can actually have a happy end where everyone is free, because the good guys made the choice and not the bad guys. And that's bad. That falls flat in a lot of ways, which is a huge shame, because once again, we end up with slavery being abolished, and that's a good thing. That's how it should be, right? I really think that John Gwynne had his heart in the right place here. I just think he kind of failed because of the way he wrote the books to actually deliver what could be delivered there. And once again, the fundamental part here is freedoms cannot be given, because then there's still the privilege of the person giving the power, right? Elvar deciding to set everyone free is a different thing from people actually fighting for their freedoms. And that's obviously something that we can't discuss at length here, but she's still dealing from a position of power and privilege, and that is not ever undermined in any way, shape or form. Now let's talk about the word choice, because that's where the thing gets even worse. Skraeling. See, there are one group of monsters in these books about Skraeling that are basically like orcs, I guess, in the way they are described. And Gwynne uses a lot of Norse words for stuff, and these are called Skraeling. Now, if you know your Norse stuff, even vaguely, you may recognize that word, because it's a word that Norse raiders and, I guess you can call them settlers if you want to, used for Native Americans they encountered over there. And it's not a nice term. It was basically a slur back then, calling them weaklings, treacherous, and so forth, and cowards. So it is a racist slur, and he uses that for monsters in this book. And that is really fucking racist at the end of the day, because it's still a fucking slur that you're using that has been used to actually insult actual human beings. And no, don't do that. And it does undermine the whole idea of, everyone being equal and having equal rights. After all, at the end of the day, it does undermine that. They are evil creatures, and they are called by a racist slur from the Viking era. And John Gwynne knows that. He has to know that. He's been parading, he's been waving around his Viking reenactment credentials like a 15-year-old his dick for the last 10 years at least. He knows that. So I don't understand why it's in there. I assume he just didn't think about it, which is, white privilege, I guess, where we don't realize that this can be hurtful. I assume that because I don't think he's a racist. I very much don't think that. I want to make that clear. But I think it's really important that we talk about that fact, and that maybe John Gwynne thinks about what he did there and why he did it, because that's bad. That's really bad, man. Okay, let's finish the whole thing. These books are fucking exhausting. I'm done with them. I'm really glad I'm done with them, especially in this final one. There's just every second chapter, it has at least one fight scene in it, and at some point it's just exhausting. It's fighting, more shield walls, more axes, more sea axes, more all of that stuff. It's happening the entire fucking time, and there's no breather, there's nothing, and it flattens the whole thing. And that's where I think it's bad. The same with magic. Like the first book and the second book, magic happened sometimes, but not a lot of magic. Magic, whether it's Sether or Galdor magic, and once again, really cool that Gwynne picks the word Sether there, which is something that, neo-pagan, Norse neo-pagan Azatru people also use for their magic practice and so forth. He knows his shit, is my point. That was really cool. You suddenly have one magic spell happening every, 200 pages. That's good. That makes magic stand out. This book, it's constant magic overkill, and it's constant battle overkill, and it flattens the entire experience into just a slurry of fight scenes. And that's bad. That's bad pacing. That's bad variation. That's bad dynamics. It's just exhausting at this point. And that's, I think, why the whole trilogy started bad. It has some really cool ideas in the Hunger of the Gods with the more cosmic horror bits and pieces. And now we're at the end where basically I'm just tired of all the fighting. Like our characters, as we are told, they're also tired, but they also decide to, start again and do more of the fighting stuff. Yeah, I'm glad it's over. And I don't think I will read any other John Gwynne books at this point. I thought I'd give it a try. I liked the idea of the world building, really. It's really cool, the ideas. And then the execution is just bad. In a lot of ways, it's tiring, it's exhausting, and the whole scaling thing just really fucks me up. Maybe it's because I expected John Gwynne to be a nice guy. And I still think he's a nice guy. But why? And that's sort of where I'm ending with this. I'm really sorry, it's not a fun book rant. It's just me being really exhausted, being annoyed by something that is objectively bad and no one talks about it. And no. I won't read any John Gwynne anymore because clearly he's not the writer for me. If you enjoyed the books, I really hope that this gave you maybe pause to think about why you enjoyed them and why that may be something that you need to think about. Once again, it's fine to enjoy them from time to time, and enjoy action from time to time and stuff like that. And Vikings can be cool, I get it. But think about those like deeper connotations that are in those kind of plot lines, in the use of words that we have there. And with, Norse themes often being very much tied to conservative, to put it mildly, to right-wing ideas, to toxic masculinity and racism and so forth. It's unfortunate to have these bits and pieces floating around in this book, where they really don't have to be in there. That's the sad part. So yeah, anyway, what did you think about the books? What do you think about my video? Talk about it in the comments. Yell at me. Like, subscribe, share, do all of these things. I hope the next video will be more upbeat and positive. And until then, thanks for sticking with me. Cheers.